Thanks, Rita. Hello, you're watching Wales Today. I'm Rebecca John. The headlines. A union describes Tata Steel's plans to cut 2,800 jobs as devastating for the UK steel industry. Some families have worked at the steelworks for generations and now face an uncertain future.
The Tata Steel officially confirmed that 2,800 jobs are going to be lost.
Thanks, Jane. Hello, you're watching Wales Today. I'm Nick Savini. The headlines this lunchtime. All the latest as crucial talks are underway between union leaders and Tata Steel bosses over the future of Port Talbot. Good afternoon. Bosses at Tata Steel and union leaders are meeting now to decide the future of the steel industry in Wales. At stake are thousands of jobs. And obviously, Port Talbot, as the biggest steel plant in Britain, is the focus of the discussions. Unions have presented a plan to the Indian-owned company to limit any job losses by extending the period in which the plant moves to greener production methods. Well, our business correspondent, Hugh Thomas, is at Port Talbot for us this lunchtime. So, Hugh, what can we expect from this meeting today?
Well, this is a really important meeting because it is the moment when the unions discover just what Tata plans to do at this site in Port Talbot, but also at its operations across the UK. And remember, Tata employs 8,000 people. Around half of those are based here in Port Talbot. And today's meeting, as you say, is a chance for Tata to feed back to the unions as to whether it's going to take on board any of the alternative plan that the unions presented. The unions want a longer transition here. They accept that the blast furnaces need to close, but they want at least one to stay operational until a brand new electric arc furnace, which melts scrap steel, is installed and up and running. So many more years of life, they say, in the blast furnace behind me. But we know that Tata Steel was considering a much worse option in the union's eyes, which would be to close both blast furnaces almost immediately, with a loss of up to 3,000 jobs across the UK, but Port Talbot being hardest hit with those job losses. The unions are in this meeting now, and now it's penciled to last for 3 hours. We also don't know whether we will get the result of that meeting today, because Tata Steel would rather coordinate it so that their senior executives who are in this hotel in London addressing union leaders now, they want them to be able to come to Port Talbot to speak to workers tomorrow morning and to then make a public announcement around 11:30 so that everybody else understands what's going on. But yes, certainly that crucial meeting happening now. We may get some details out this afternoon, but the big announcement here in Port Talbot tomorrow morning.
OK, Hugh, we'll speak to you later this evening. Hugh Thomas, our business correspondent at Port Talbot there. We'll be back at 6:30 with the very latest, of course, on any developments with the Tata story. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a good afternoon.
Hello, welcome to Wales Today. I'm Nick Savini in Port Talbot, where steel workers are facing the devastating prospect of up to 3,000 job losses, with the expectation that Tata are going to close the blast furnaces behind me.
It's a massive number that the people are talking about. Yeah, there are people that want to go, but we've got to look after the people that want to stay.
If 3,000 people are going to lose their jobs, the UK government is not going to walk away and not turn their backs on those people or that community.
If it becomes reality, unions say it would be disastrous for the workforce. We will get an official announcement from Tata tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we will be getting all the reaction tonight. Good evening from Port Talbot, where it appears tonight that everyone's worst fears have been confirmed. The BBC understands that up to 3,000 job losses will be formally announced here, the majority at the steelworks behind me in Port Talbot, Britain's biggest. The expectation is that Tata Steel are going to close the 2 blast furnaces. This all arose after crunch talks at lunchtime in central London Between union leaders and bosses of TATA, the unions had presented an alternative plan to the company, but that appears to have been rejected. There are two big things at play here. It is losses and it is the environment. The company, Tata Steel, says it is losing across the UK £1 million a day, and this is all happening at the same time that we have to see the transition to a greener, cleaner way of making steel. In terms of the scale of the losses that we are talking about, it is dramatic, and I don't think this industry has really seen anything like it since the early 1980s. Tonight we will be getting the reaction from the community, from the workers, and plenty of political reaction as well. But first, here's our business correspondent, Hugh Thomas.
After years of questions about the future of steelmaking, the answers being provided for workers here are about as bad as they get. Both blast furnaces in Port Talbot will close as part of major changes to the way Tata produces steel. Jobs will go across the UK, but South Wales will be hardest hit. The news will be officially announced tomorrow, and unions say they'll fight for every job.
The GMB and the other trade unions will be using all tools at our disposal to make sure we're safeguarding steelmaking and the jobs that supports within the area. We want to ensure that any transitionary money that's been promised, there's £100 million promised to the Transition Board, is invested in industrial jobs of comparable levels to make sure that we're maintaining lifestyles and livelihoods in South Wales.
Under plans shared with unions today, Tata Steel will close the blast furnaces in Port Talbot this year. Up to 3,000 jobs will be lost across the UK, and it'll happen quickly, with most redundancies happening by September. They're still producing tons of steel here in Port Talbot, but the way they do that is going to change dramatically. Now, the plan communicated by Tata Steel to union bosses today involves a big hit on the workforce, and for many here, it's the worst case scenario. Workers in Port Talbot were stunned by the news.
You've heard the speculation about the numbers. It's a massive number that the people are talking about. Yeah, there are people that want to go, but we got to look after the people that want to stay, the people with the young families, the people with the mortgages. That's the people who we are concerned about at the moment. That's the people we want to look after and make sure they got a future.
Tata Steel has previously said it was losing £1 million a day. It's a financial pressure as well as a green transition which is driving the changes.
Traditional steel making with blast furnaces and boss plants, which is what Port Talbot has, is quite carbon intensive. It's responsible for 3% of UK emissions, and the markets around the world are increasingly moving to lower carbon steel and asking for lower carbon steel. Electric arc furnaces which recycle steel are lower carbon, but we do still have some concerns about how they're actually doing it as well. I think there could be other ways of doing it, and it could be part of a broader UK strategy that would be really helpful and help sort of mitigate some of those job impacts that we're seeing.
The UK government has given Tata Steel £500 million to help it build an electric arc furnace here, while also managing a £100 million fund to support workers affected by the changes.
Can be used for training people. It may be used to change infrastructure to bring other companies in. But the most important thing for me is that if 3,000 people are going to lose their jobs, the UK government is not going to walk away and not turn their backs on those people or that community. And that's why I'm going to be working with many others, including from Welsh Government, to make sure that that money gets spent and that the priority is going to be anyone who loses their job. I want people to know that.
Tata's plans ripple beyond the steelworks and have caused concern right across the community.
It's not just the 3,000 within Tata itself, but it's thousands of people on the supply chain, on the contractors who work for Tata, who actually work in businesses that supply those businesses. It's a huge impact upon our communities, and this will see a huge loss of employment in a time when people are going to be struggling financially anyway. Here we have a cost of living crisis, and here we go, thousands of people put out of work.
Ahead of tomorrow's announcement, the focus for politicians of all parties this evening has been on the workforce. Significant changes are about to begin in Port Talbot and at Tata's other sites around Wales, with workers waiting to find out if their jobs will be lost in the process.
Our business correspondent Hugh Thomas there. Well, I'm joined by Alan Coombs from the Community Union and Stephen Kinnock, who's the Aberavon MP. Good evening to both of you. Alan, we're going to get a formal announcement from Tata in the morning. What is your understanding about what's going to happen?
My understanding is from the meetings today, TATA have told the unions that they're rejecting their multi-union plan and they're going with their original proposal in November, which is closure of the heavy end in Port Talbot with the loss of up to 3,000 jobs, which is totally unacceptable.
The alternative plan for you was for everything to happen at a slower rate. How many jobs potentially could have been saved as a result of that?
Potentially there could be 1,000 of them jobs saved, maybe more going forward, but it was the opportunity to do it in a proper manner over a proper timescale.
Stephen Kinnock, this will be devastating for the community, won't it?
It could be a devastating blow. This is the beating heart of the economy and of our community. Not a single household in this Aberavon constituency is not connected to our steelworks. Everybody is here looking at what happens in the steelworks, deeply troubled and concerned about it. It's the jobs, it's the future for families, and it's absolutely vital that Tata Steel look again at the multi-union proposal, which is a convincing and compelling proposal, and also that they listen to Labour, because Labour has a £3 billion clean steel fund and we might have a general election this year.
The trouble is, Tata Steel are losing £1 million a day.
Well, I think somebody needs to look at that figure, because I've always been very sceptical about that figure. But what I would also say is it's a false economy. If you take choices now that end up with your customers walking away from you...
It's what they're telling us. Are you saying they're making money?
Well, I think we need to look at those figures very carefully. But what I would say is it's a false economy. If you take choices now which lead to your customers walking away, you might save a bit on costs, but you'll lose your revenue streams because your customers don't want to buy carbon-intensive steel from India.
And Alan Coombs, you know the industry here. You obviously know this company is losing money.
I've known this company have lost money over a period of time. That's due to poor choices and poor decisions made at a high level. They've chosen over a period of time to support the Dutch industry. They have taken the profit from the UK and we've had to deal with that at the time. Now we are paying the price for it.
What will you do now?
At the moment, we've got to communicate with the workforce. The workforce have been treated very badly all through this process. We've got to give them the information we've got, and we've got to gauge the strength of feeling what the workforce want to do.
People have talked about industrial action. Would that be the case?
Nobody wants industrial action. It's always the last solution, but at the end of the day, there's only so much people can take, and we want to protect the people and the workforce and look after them the best we can.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Alan Coombs and Stephen Kinnock, thank you very much indeed. So as it has been said there, the steelworks obviously is the beating heart of this community in Port Talbot, and indeed for so many communities across South Wales. Ben Price has been out in the community now gauging reaction to the news that has been breaking throughout the afternoon and the evening.
You don't have to look very far to begin to understand the magnitude of the steelworks and what it means as an employer to Port Talbot. Wherever you are here, you'll more than likely catch a glimpse of the plant's blast furnaces rising above the houses. But as news trickled through about the future of the works today, this was the initial reaction in the town centre.
I think the impact would be pretty bad for Port Talbot itself, because, like you said, there's still run down a bit as there is now. And the less jobs you got here, it's going to be even worse in the future.
It's very sad, and we've got a lot of people we know that are in the steelworks, and this town, I think, is going to die because we rely on Tata Steel.
Personally, it's like a love-hate relationship with Tata. It's really bad for the environment, but again, it generates so many jobs, therefore everyone is going to be impacted.
When there's a big news story at the steelworks in Port Talbot, it not only affects families and local businesses, but entire communities. However, the threat this time around feels much more significant because the future of this town is in question. And support for steelworkers isn't just something you hear on the streets, it's also become very visible. Communities have been built around the steelworks. There are around half a dozen football and half a dozen rugby teams within a stone's throw of the site. Andrew has been involved with Aberavon Harlequins Rugby Club for years as a player and a coach. He told me what he believes could be the impact on his club and others.
I think you could galvanise teams in the short run, or in the short term, because people will have it as an outlet to get rid of their frustrations. But in the long term, I could have people who move away from employment that can't afford to go out on the weekends or can't afford to keep their hobbies going.
This clothing shop in the centre of Port Talbot is owned by a former steelworker who lost his job in a round of cuts in 2016. His business is very visibly rooted in the town's culture and spirit. Nigel also says he finds it difficult to imagine Port Talbot's skyline without the blast furnaces.
A lot of people just look at them like, we smell them, we hear them, we hear them a lot, they're dynamic and it's something that we get very fond of. Them noises, that's the sound of home, a lot of us are really at home with the sounds of industry, so that is going to be, I don't know how we're going to adapt to it really. There'll be bonuses because we'll hear the sound of birds a bit more often and stuff, and there's going to be new land and perhaps people will focus on the beauty of the area.
Work continues tonight at the steelworks as a community comes to terms with a pending new chapter which will in time change the iconic image of this town.
Well, that was Ben Price. I'm joined by our business correspondent Hugh Thomas. And Hugh, fast moving actually since that meeting ended this afternoon. But we should say no formal announcement till tomorrow morning from TATA. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so we think TATA will be releasing a statement about 11:30 tomorrow. So TV Narendran, the managing director of Tata Steel, is in the country. He was in that meeting today in London. He's going to be in Port Talbot tomorrow morning. But we know that staff are waiting to be told. We've heard from workers today who don't know what's going on. They've been asking us out here what the latest is. My understanding from speaking to senior union figures over the past few weeks is that some of them saw this coming. There have been threats made behind the scenes by the union, say, if you do this to us, Tata, we're going to war against you in terms of the types of industrial action they might now try to enact if it was a worst case scenario that was delivered to them in that meeting in London today. So it's very difficult times ahead, not just in terms of how Tata manages this announcement tomorrow and the reaction it will get, but in the coming weeks we know that unions have lined themselves up ready to move quite quickly into industrial action if that's what the workforce decides to do. But certainly tomorrow we're expecting the detail. We do expect, to be honest, that they repeat much of what we've already been talking about tonight.
Yeah, indeed, plenty of anger out there. Hugh, thanks very much indeed for everything tonight. That's it for me for now. Claire, I'll be back with you later in the programme. Back to you in the studio.
Talbot, for now, thank you very much. Let's return to our top story now, and news that Tata Steel is set to push ahead with plans to close both blast furnaces. Nick Savini in Port Talbot for us tonight. Nick.
Yes, thank you, Claire. We will get that formal announcement tomorrow morning. So we're in a strange, deeply concerning period and an evening, certainly for the steel workers here. But the expectation is that up to 3,000 people could lose their job. A huge moment, lose their jobs, a huge moment for the steel industry in Wales and, of course, Port Talbot. I'm joined by Felicity Evans, our money editor, and Louise Miskell from Swansea University, who also is from Port Talbot. But Felice, to start off with you, we should say the impact economically is far wider actually than just the steelworks.
Absolutely, Nick. I think that's a really essential point. We're talking today about 3,000 job losses potentially around Tata's operations, the bulk of them expected to be here at Port Talbot. But that doesn't take into account the contractors, the suppliers, the landlords and ladies, the people who run cafes, all the other businesses that either rely on these steelworks for their business or alternatively rely on people who work here spending their money with them. So actually the ripples going out affect thousands upon thousands of people.
And Louise, you grew up in the shadow of this steelworks. It's seen huge change over the years, isn't it? But boy, this potentially, if it comes to pass, would be a big one.
Absolutely. I mean, thinking back to the 1980s, it's been almost a constant story of change and turbulence. It's gone through job losses in the past, changes of ownership, and new technologies coming and going. But this does feel different because the blast furnaces are so iconic. It's the start of the steelmaking process. You lose that and you take a huge chunk out of this important site, and it's what makes it special in a way.
Yeah, and it's this historic link with coal, isn't it? The coal goes in, and that's the reason that they came to South Wales. I said earlier, potentially the biggest change since the early 1980s. Does it feel like that to you?
It does feel like that, and the link with coal, yes. I mean, that makes it very sort of symbolic, I think, in terms of the history of Wales and the history of steel and the British economy. It's a game changer, and nobody quite knows what the future's going to hold, which is what makes it so concerning for everybody.
Phyllis, a quick word with you from you in terms of the bottom line.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Hugh was talking about this earlier. You know, we can talk about the climate concerns. These are very polluting, these blast furnaces. We can talk about the new technology of the electric arc furnace that Tata plans to build here. But the bottom line, I think, is that Tata's UK steel operations are losing money hand over fist, according to the company, and they want to put a stop to that.
OK, Felicity Evans and Louise Miskell, thank you very much indeed, both of you. So, on a deeply concerning night here in Port Talbot, we shall all await the official announcement from the company tomorrow morning. Until then, it appears that everyone is gearing up for the loss of potentially thousands of jobs for the steel industry, with the majority being lost at the Port Talbot Steel Works behind me. From Port Talbot, back to you in the studio and the weather forecast.
Thanks.
Thank you, Derek. Well, it's a brutally cold night here in Port Talbot, and I think steelworkers are gearing up for a pretty brutal series of announcements tomorrow when Tata Steel will formally announce their plans for the years ahead. There was a series of talks, critical talks earlier, in which the future was laid out. Unions tonight on the programme have told us pretty openly that up to 3,000 job losses are expected. But that is Wales Today from Port Talbot. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night.
Thank you, Sophie. Hello, I'm Claire Summers. Welcome to Wales Today. The headlines tonight. Shock and frustration. Tata Steel is set to close both blast furnaces at Port Talbot, leading to the loss of up to 3,000 jobs. The steelworks, an integral part of the town. We've been there gauging the impact this will have on the community. Good evening. Tata Steel is to push ahead with plans to close both blast furnaces at its Port Talbot works, the BBC understands. It's feared this could lead to the loss of 3,000 jobs. Steel bosses and unions met today, with Tata expected to formally announce the plan tomorrow morning. Unions say it's a crushing blow. Here's our business correspondent, Hugh Thomas.
After years of questions about the future of steelmaking, the answers being provided for workers here are about as bad as they get. Both blast furnaces in Port Talbot will close as part of major changes to the way Tata produces steel. Jobs will go across the UK, but South Wales will be hardest hit. The news will be officially announced tomorrow, and unions say they'll fight for every job.
We want to ensure that any transitionary money that's been promised, there's £100 million promised to the Transition Board, is invested in industrial jobs of comparable levels to make sure that we're maintaining lifestyles and livelihoods in South Wales.
Under plans shared with unions today, Tata Steel will close the blast furnaces in Port Talbot this year. Up to 3,000 jobs will be lost across the UK, and it'll happen quickly, with most redundancies happening by September. They're still producing tons of steel here in Port Talbot, but the way they do that is going to change dramatically. Now, the plan communicated by Tata Steel to union bosses today involves a big hit on the workforce, and for many here, it's the worst case scenario. Workers in Port Talbot were stunned by the news.
It's a massive number that the people are talking about. Yeah, there are people that want to go, but we got to look after the people that want to stay, the people with the young families, the people with the mortgages. That's the people who we are concerned about.
Tata Steel has previously said it was losing £1 million a day. It's a financial pressure as well as a green transition which is driving the changes.
Traditional steel making with blast furnaces and boss plants, which is what Port Talbot has, is quite carbon intensive. It's responsible for 3% of UK emissions, and the markets around the world are increasingly moving to lower carbon steel and asking for lower carbon steel. Electric arc furnaces, which recycle steel, are lower carbon. But we do still have some concerns about how they're actually doing it as well. I think there could be other ways of doing it, and it could be part of a broader UK strategy that would be really helpful and help sort of mitigate some of those job impacts that we're seeing.
The UK government has given Tata Steel £500 million to help it build an electric arc furnace here, while also managing a £100 million fund to support workers affected by the changes.
Can be used for training people. It may be used to change infrastructure to bring other companies in. But the most important thing for me is that if 3,000 people are going to lose their jobs, the UK government is not going to walk away and not turn their backs on those people or that community.
We urge Tata Steel to not do anything that might be irreversible before a general election. We are committed to a £3 billion clean steel fund. We see that as a vital part of our plan to get to clean power by 2030, to get the highest growth in the G7, and none of that can happen without a vibrant and competitive steel industry.
Significant changes are about to begin in Port Talbot and at Tata's other sites around Wales, with workers waiting to find out if their jobs will be lost in the process.
Well, the steelworks is the heartbeat of the town, and almost everyone there has either worked at the site or has a friend or family member who does. And with so many families and businesses revolving around the steelworks, what will be the impact on the town? Well, Ben Price has been getting the reaction of the community.
You don't have to look very far to begin to understand the magnitude of the steelworks and what it means as an employer to Port Talbot. Wherever you are here, you'll more than likely catch a glimpse of the plant's blast furnaces rising above the houses. But as news trickled through about the future of the works today, this was the initial reaction in the town centre.
I think the impact would be pretty bad for Port Talbot itself because, like I said, there's still run down a bit as there is now. And the less jobs you got here, it's going to be even worse in the future.
It's very sad, and we've got a lot of people we know that are in the steelworks, and this town, I think, is going to die because we rely on Tata Steel.
Personally, it's like a love-hate relationship with Tata. It's really bad for the environment, but again, it generates so many jobs, therefore everyone is going to be impacted.
When there's a big news story at the steelworks in Port Talbot, it not only affects families and local businesses, but entire communities. However, the threat this time around feels much more significant because the future of this town is in question. And support for steelworkers isn't just something you hear on the streets, it's also become very visible. Communities have been built around the steelworks. There are around half a dozen football and half a dozen rugby teams within a stone's throw of the site. Andrew has been involved with Aberavon Harlequins Rugby Club for years as a player and a coach. He told me what he believes could be the impact on his club and others.
I think you could galvanise teams in the short run or in the short term because people will have it as an outlet to get rid of their frustrations. But in the long term, that could have people who move away from employment that can't afford to go out on the weekends or can't afford to keep their hobbies going.
This clothing shop in the centre of Port Talbot is owned by a former steelworker who lost his job in a round of cuts in 2016. His business is very visibly rooted in the town's culture and spirit. Nigel also says he finds it difficult to imagine Port Talbot's skyline without the blast furnaces.
A lot of people just look at them like, we smell them, we hear them, we hear them a lot, they're dynamic and it's something that we get very fond of, them noises, that's the sound of home, a lot of us are really at home with the sounds of industry, so that is going to be, I don't know how we're going to adapt to it really. There'll be bonuses because we'll hear the sound of birds a bit more often and stuff, and there's going to be new land and perhaps people will focus on the beauty of the area.
Work continues tonight at the steelworks as a community comes to terms with a pending new chapter which will, in time, change the iconic image of this town.
And we'll have more on the plans for the steelworks in tomorrow's programme.
Hello, welcome to Wales Today. I'm Nick Savini in Port Talbot on the day that Tata Steel officially confirmed that 2,800 jobs are going to be lost. There has been a furious reaction, but the company says it has to respond to a decade of financial losses.
It's not that we've given up in a hurry, it's not that we've not tried hard enough, but I think we've reached a stage where The question is, how do we create a future which is sustainable?
Some families here in Port Talbot have worked at the plant for generations, among them Jason Midwinter and his son Owen.
When I joined a year and a half ago, I thought I was set, you know, I thought I had a job for life with TATA, but a year and a half gone by now, and I'll be honest with you, I was looking for jobs last night.
The changes would slash Wales's carbon emissions, but environmentalists say it should not happen at the community's expense.
The transition to net zero for many is going to start feeling like a cost and a burden and something that is putting their jobs at risk rather than a positive vision.
As union leaders call it, the destruction of the steel industry as we know it. We will have all the reaction from the workforce, from the community and the political fallout. Good evening. Well, after the rumours and after the speculation, we have finally had the official confirmation from Tata Steel, and it arrived in the form of a lengthy email at 11:30 this morning, and frankly many of the details will be devastating for thousands of workers. It was confirmed that 2,800 staff are going to lose their jobs. 2,500 will lose them over the course of the next 18 months. We do not have an exact breakdown of where the jobs are going to go, but the expectation is that the majority of them will be lost at the giant Port Talbot Steel Works behind me. 2 of the blast furnaces will close this year. Now, Tata Steel, for their part, effectively say enough is enough. Over a 15-year period, they've had to find something like £5 billion to deal with the losses. They say they're losing £1 million a day in terms of their UK steel operations. Now, a critical point here actually is what's going to happen with what's called the electric arc furnace. This is the new investment to create the greener steel. And the question is, it's going to take 5 years to build. So where are they going to get the steel from in the meantime? The unions were desperate to keep one of the blast furnaces behind me open. It would mitigate some of the losses. The companies say they can't afford to do that. Instead, the steel is going to come in from India and Holland. That has provoked a furious response from the unions and other people saying it is decarbonisation on the cheap. Now, in terms of the impact here in Port Talbot, frankly, the figures speak for themselves. There is roughly a workforce of around 4,000. We are looking at a huge chunk of that being lost. Let's say it could be half, possibly more. With the story of the day, here's our business correspondent, Hugh Thomas.
A plan for sustainable steelmaking in Wales, or a disaster for the workforce. Tata Steel and the unions couldn't be further apart. The confirmation of the company's intentions has finally ended all the speculation. Within months, they're going to start shutting down the heavy end of steel production here in Port Talbot. What that means is both blast furnaces will be switched off by the end of the year. The impact is going to be swift and severe. The boss of Tata Steel was here to deliver the news and to defend an industrial change unlike anything seen in Wales since the 1980s.
We've tried very hard over the years to preserve the site, keep it going despite all the challenges. Over the last 15 years, I think we've invested something like £5 billion to keep the business going. So it's not that we've given up in a hurry. It's not that we've not tried hard enough. But I think we've reached a stage where the question is, how do we create a future which is sustainable?
But what you're doing 2 things. There's a big decision, a financial decision this year to shut down the heavy end. The other idea about building an electric arc furnace, greener steel, that's happening it'll be 4 or 5 years and before that's online. In the meantime, you will be importing slab steel from India, from the Netherlands, which is as polluting as the blast furnaces behind you are. This doesn't solve a climate problem in the interim, and you could have just transitioned into an electric arc furnace here.
Well, if that was possible, we would have done it, but I think there are 2-3 reasons why that's not possible. First is the financial impact itself. I think the question is, what is the affordability of a plan which says continue to run the blast furnaces, because that's going to cost us at least £600-700 million more. The second challenge is we are having to build an electric arc furnace in the existing steel mill shop. So if you were to run the blast furnace, you're going to run an existing steel mill shop and try to build another furnace in that shop, which leads to a lot of operational complexity, and there are safety issues involved as well.
But you've built a whole plant here with blast furnaces in the middle. That's not, I mean, it's the financial reason is the imperative here, isn't it?
When we built that plant here, there was nothing else here, right? When you're trying to build a plant inside an operating plant, I think there are a lot of risks. So we looked at it when the unions came to us with this plan on the 9th of November. We spent the last 2 months looking at it from an engineering point of view, from an operational point of view, leave aside the financial part. And we saw the complexity and the risk. So it's not just one reason. There are multiple reasons why we felt this would be a challenge. And the other part is the British government has also given us the support because there's a carbon CO2 reduction happening. You know, otherwise it would be seen as a subsidy for a loss-making steel company. So the reason why you can justify public support for a transition plan like this is you're bringing down the CO2.
TATA says its plans will secure the steel industry, but the unions argue it'll be wiped out.
This is the worst case scenario. It is doomsday for us. It's the decimation of the UK steel industry from a company point of view for TATA. And to be fair, I don't think we have an option. We have to do whatever we can to try and keep it sustainable.
A consultation process on TATA's plans will now begin, with unions hoping there's still time to change course.
Well, Hugh is with me now. So Hugh, you went in there, you spoke to the boss, and it really is all about the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah, fundamentally it's about what they feel is good for their business. It's no coincidence the share price shot up over 2% in Mumbai for Tata Steel today, because investors see the UK and this operation as the problem child of that global Tata group. They've moved today to cut their losses with the promise that this electric arc furnace will come in 4 or 5 years' time with new jobs associated with that. But in the meantime, it's about cutting the loss that they say they're making with the existing setup here and having that immediate and severe, as I said, impact on jobs as well. But certainly the mood today was one about, you know, business realism, financial realism as far as Tata Steel is concerned, with an acknowledgement, of course, from them that it'll be the workers who are hardest hit by this.
OK, Hugh, thank you very much indeed. Our business correspondent, Hugh Thomas there. Well, a real feature of the steelworks behind me is the generations of families that work here. It really is not uncommon to find different generations all there at the same time. And our correspondent Ben Price has been in Port Talbot today to catch up with one father-son combination to get their reaction to the news.
Digesting the news they could soon be without a job. It's something both father and son steelworkers Jason and Owen Midwinter thought they'd never have to face.
I never thought this would come. We've had tough times in the 16 years I've been there, and you know, there's been job losses, there's been reorgs and things like that, but it's never been this bad. Obviously, when I joined a year and a half ago, I thought I was set. You know, I thought I had a job for life with TATA, but a year and a half gone by now, and I'll be honest with you, I was looking for jobs last night.
A trainee in the blast control room, Owen says he loves his job. Dad Jason says there's no place like it. To think that one day the iconic blast furnaces that are part of the fabric of their town will eventually disappear, they say, is a strange thought.
It's an eyesore. It's, you know, but it's our eyesore. You know, it's if you live here, it's part of your everyday life. You don't notice it.
With a house, a new mortgage and the hope of raising a family in his hometown, Owen is now unsure what the future holds.
Obviously, living here my whole life and planning to live here my whole life, I hope that we can carry on, but I find it very difficult with so many job losses going, just under 3,000. You know, I honestly feel as if these small cafes, these restaurants, these pubs, they might close with so many families affected. I'm 50 now, all right, I can't retire yet, and I can't really take redundancy. I wouldn't have thought it'd be that much for myself. But I've got a trade. I can go out, I can go and find a job, even if it means travelling. That wouldn't bother me. If it meant him having a job, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Like thousands in Port Talbot, Jason and Owen say they're hopeful, but know there are tough times ahead.
Well, a central feature to all of this is decarbonisation. It is a huge carbon emitter, the steel industry, and particularly the Port Talbot plant behind me, which after all is the biggest in the UK. And as I mentioned earlier, at the heart of it are the plans for the electric arc furnace, which will undeniably dramatically reduce the carbon emissions. Here's our environment correspondent, Stefan Messenger, now on the project to go green in the steel industry.
Nowhere else in the UK produces as many planet-warming carbon emissions as this vast site. In its big blast furnaces, carbon in the form of coal reacts with the oxygen in rocky lumps of iron ore, leaving liquid metal to be turned into steel, and masses of CO2. Switching to an electric furnace like this one at Cardiff's Selsa Steelworks would take the Port Talbot plant in a different direction.
In this method, a lot of recycled steel is gathered together and 3 large graphite electrodes are lowered into this recycled steel material. An electric arc is generated between those electrodes, can generate temperatures up to around 3,000 degrees in an electric arc furnace, which then melts that scrap material down to be turned into other steel products.
As the name suggests, the new furnace would run off electricity, the idea being that over time more and more of this would come from green sources like wind and solar. For every tonne of steel made using the blast furnaces, TATA says it emits approximately 2 tonnes or 2,000 kilograms of CO2. The company reckons it can reduce that to between 150 and 200 kilograms using an electric arc. For Wales, overhauling the steelworks in this way could lead to somewhere in the region of a 20% cut in the country's overall emissions. Environmentalists, though, aren't celebrating, arguing more should have been done to secure new green jobs in the area for the thousands now losing theirs.
For a long time we've known that the site in Port Talbot would need to be decarbonised. However, we've not really seen adequate planning from both levels of government, Welsh Government and UK Government, in terms of setting in that pathway to ensure that the transition in Port Talbot is a just one. The transition to net zero for many is going to start feeling like a cost and a burden and something that is putting their jobs at risk rather than a positive vision of a green future.
Worth remembering too that when UK emission stats are worked out, they don't take into account the carbon impact of goods we import from overseas. And critics say what's happening to Port Talbot will leave the UK reliant on shipping in steel from countries which aren't moving as fast to greener ways of working for several years to come. TATA says its plans are the most practical and economically sustainable way of cutting emissions and securing the future of steelmaking in Port Talbot. The Welsh and UK governments say they're working to help all those affected.
The case for the environment there with our correspondent Stefan Messenger. Right, let's pick up on the politics of all of this, because inevitably it's never far away. I'm joined by the Welsh Government's Economy Minister, Vaughan Gething. We'll be speaking to him in a minute. But there has been a lot of criticism, particularly from the union leaders, towards the Conservative UK government, who are investing £500 million for the construction of the new electric arc furnace. Nevertheless, there have been calls for them to have done more to try to protect the jobs here. Earlier we caught up with David T.C. Davis, the Welsh Secretary, and he justified the decisions he had made in terms of the investment in the industry in Wales.
We were faced with a simple choice, which was either TATA leaves completely, 8,000 jobs are lost, 12,700 in the supply chain, and the ability to produce steel in Wales is lost, or we accept the tragedy of 3,000 jobs going, but we keep 5,000 jobs in TATA and across Wales, and another 12,700 in the supply chain, and we build a newer, greener way of making steel, which will still be produced in Wales.
The Secretary of State for Wales, David T.C. Davis there. Right, as I said earlier, Vaughan Gething is with me now. Clearly, Mr. Gething, a devastating announcement today. What are you going to do about it?
Well, we're working with trade unions, with the people directly affected. We're talking with the company. We've had businesslike and respectful conversations with them. We've made the case for a different future that would require more investment in a deeper and longer transition that would not cost the extraordinary numbers of jobs. We also, though, need the UK government to be part of the solution. They've effectively set a ceiling on what can be done here, and that sets the framework for the consultation on eye-watering job losses that have been announced today.
Eye-watering job losses indeed. It's too late to change it now though, surely.
The final whistle has not gone is the start of another stage of consultation. And within
the final whistle has gone. Why are you giving people false hope? Companies like this don't make announcements like this and go back on it.
I don't think that's true at all, Nick. With respect.
It is true.
With respect, they've set out what they're going to do based on the current position. If there are blast furnaces that are still here and there's a different government within the UK with a different attitude to investing in the future of steel, it is possible to have a different outcome.
Well,
and it's really important to make the case for the best deal for steel, not the cheapest deal. And it's a point that I've made about not making irreversible decisions based on the current level of support from the UK
Let's deal
government.
with the political point. We spoke with the senior executive from TATA. He says if a new Labour government comes in and throws money at them, it won't make any difference because they need to cover their daily losses. That's the point.
There's a point here about what the transition requires, how much support is available for the capital investment, what that means to the company and its customers for the businesses it still needs to protect. I don't accept that there is no prospect of a different future. That would be a message of desperation and hopelessness. That is not the job of the Welsh Government.
Where's the Welsh Government been in a few months? I have to say, been very quiet on TATA. Where's the campaigning been? Where's been the fight to try to save the jobs?
I think that's extraordinarily unfair, Nick. We have been in regular consultation and conversation with people on all sides of this. You'll have seen today I published 6 letters I sent to Kemi Badnock, the business secretary, who has refused to engage meaningfully with us. We have had 12 meetings now with TATA over the last 12 months between myself and the First Minister. We've had regular engagement. We've been trying to make sure that the room is there for a consultation on a credible series of plans put forward by the trade union side. That's the job of the Welsh Government, not to be constant commentators, and we are here today making the case for the future of this sovereign sector for Port Talbot, Wales and the wider UK.
Understood. Vaughan Gething, Welsh Government Economy Minister, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Now, it is the easiest job in the world, frankly, to walk around Port Talbot and find people who are affected by the steel industry. And that is exactly what I did earlier today. I went into the community of Tai Bach, where not only did I find individuals affected, but one street in particular where virtually everyone has a direct connection with the steelworks. And of course, it is worth stressing, this has an incredible history here, really dating back from the end of the Second World War.
Where once the economic blizzards of former years swept across Port Talbot.
It was at the heart of Britain's rebuilding after the war. With what was then cutting-edge technology, they came from all over the world to Port Talbot to see the new way steel was made. And then through the years, its sheer size and healthy wages earned it the nickname Treasure Island. And despite the tough years steel has had to endure, Port Talbot was a great survivor, retaining its dominant position. And the town knew it.
We've got my nephew. He is a welder in TATA. The end house is a retired TATA worker. The end house here is a purchasing officer. And then behind me, we've got a TATA electrician, TATA retired employee, and a TATA retired contractor.
Rob Jones takes me through Smyrna Cottages, a street in Tai Bach, where you don't have to look far to find a steelworker.
It is the lifeblood of our community. People see it as a big dirty beast, but they also see it as putting food on the table. Without that, the prospect of health declining in Port Talbot, more children coming into poverty, more people becoming homeless because they can't afford to pay their mortgages. That's the immediate problem we've got.
One of Rob's neighbours is Paula Humphreys, whose husband works for TATA and who runs a cafe round the corner. How are people feeling today?
The boys weren't as jovial as normal, 100%. You know, a lot of them are youngsters. Some of them recently bought houses, started families, and they don't know what the future holds for them now, do they?
I doubt there's a town anywhere in Britain where one single employer has paid for more mortgages than the steelworks here in Port Talbot. And it's at the heart of the relationship that people in this town have with it. A lot of people don't like the pollution and the dust they've had to endure for decades. But they make their peace with it because they know it gives them their livelihoods. A town and a steelworks coming to terms with a cleaner future, but one with a far smaller workforce. The thoughts of some residents in Taibach there. Right, let's get the weather and join Derek in the studio. OK, Derek, thank you very much indeed. Now, anyone driving past the Port Talbot Steelworks would realise how iconic it is, particularly if you drive past at night. You see how it dominates the skyline. And our reporter, Kate Morgan, has been finding out how it's inspired artists both in the town and further beyond.
Basic as that sounds, and as simple as it sounds, it's been a backdrop to most of our lives and our best memories.
Everyone from around here has taken photos of it at some point in their life because it's such an amazing thing to look at.
I see Port Talbot as a dreamland. I really do. You know, people think I'm joking, but there's no other place like this.
TATA Steelworks, but not quite as you usually see it. Glimpse from the streets and the community that's grown around it. Jackson Lucy describes himself as Port Talbot born and bred.
Our future's been discussed on national news. They say we got nothing left when we had nothing to lose in the first place.
His song, Save Our Steel, written in the months of uncertainty that hung over this town, details life here, with shops opening early for shift changes. He says the works is sometimes the inspiration, but always the backdrop for the vibrant creative culture here.
Then you've got like open mic nights, poetry nights, live drawing nights, comedy nights, all this around the town. You've got multiple fashion brands. There's just so much going on around the town outside of the steelworks, but also takes inspiration from life in Port Talbot, which ultimately involves the steelworks.
Driving back from university, Fionn Lloyd-Jones said she knew she was home at the first glimpse of the steelworks from the motorway. Now, as those blast furnaces close as part of plans to reduce its carbon footprint, she hopes people will see beyond the chimneys and fumes.
A lot of people look at it and they see the pollution and they do look at it as a negative thing, and I think it has affected the reputation of Port Talbot. But I do think if you come here and you meet the people, it's not like that. It is a nice area, it's a nice community here.
Photographer Rue Lewis published a book, Port Talbot UFO Investigation Club, a love letter to the town. His earliest memories of the steelworks are pressing his nose up against the car window on the way to visit his granddad in Pembrokeshire.
It's the steelworks, I know that now. but growing up, it was this place of magic and mystery. I know it sounds silly, but it's iconic. You know, everyone knows the Port Talbot skyline. Everyone knows those blast furnaces. People don't know the town so much, but they certainly recognise it.
For most of us, the steelworks is a landmark that we passed from the M4. For some, its plumes a reminder of its impact on the environment. But for others, it's a source of inspiration, an iconic Welsh landscape.
Well, let's have a final word with our money editor, Felicity Evans. Felice, we heard from Kate there actually in terms of the wider cultural impact. It is worth stressing that, isn't it? The sort of huge implications and the influence this plant has had.
Absolutely. We talk about the economic impact that this is going to have, and that is going to be huge. But the cultural impact of this plant is phenomenal too, not just for the community here in Port Talbot, but right across the UK. This is the UK's biggest steel plant. And I found out the other day that in supplying money to the Royal Mint, every 1 pence, 2 pence, 5 pence and 10 pence, or almost everyone, TATA says, has steel in it that originated from this plant. So that means everyone in the UK virtually, whether they know it or not, has had contact with a bit of Port Talbot. And that's how influential its culture is, really.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Look, let's finish up with the workers. Ferocious response from the unions today. What are the options available to them now?
I mean, the unions, as you say, absolutely ferocious. They are talking in terms of industrial action and have been really for the last 24 hours, haven't they? The question is, what is going to be the appetite for the workers in there in terms of going for that? The unions say they have been making the preparations for balloting, foreseeing what the workers want to do. So that's going to be the next decision, isn't it? Unions are saying there's a lot of anger in there and people will be up for industrial action. So we have to wait and see.
We do indeed. Our money editor, Felicity Evans, thank you very much indeed. So that is Wales Today. On the day, I think Thousands of steelworkers have really been digesting the news. After months of speculation, we finally had it confirmed about the scale of the job losses here in Port Talbot and across the Welsh steel industry. A huge moment. Thanks for watching. Good night.